Welcome to Hence the Future podcast. I'm Mattimore Cronin,
I'm Justin Clark.
and today we're discussing the future of the Democratic Party. With us today is our in-house political correspondent, Brett Ewer. Brett, it's great to have you back on the podcast.
Thanks. It's great to be back on. I'm glad I've gotten a promotion.
Yeah, so you guys, our listeners, may remember Brett from the Future of Politics. So if you're interested, we recommend you listen to that for a more high-level view. But today we're focused really on the Democratic Party, and specifically I want to start off with the debates. So I want to get your guys' sense of, first of all, just who do you think did well in the debates, and also then we can move on to what are the different visions of America in 2019 that each of these candidates are portraying on the debate stage. So let's start with who you think actually did well. What do you guys think?
I mean, on the first night, the person that stood out to me was John Delaney. You know, he was a guy I hadn't really heard about, but he seemed so reasonable about everything. I don't know if he has a shot at winning, but he seemed to have real solutions to everything, which I thought was interesting.
Yeah, I mean, this one tweet that John Delaney had really sums it up, where he says, "I don't understand why anyone goes through the trouble of running for president if they can't explain how their plans work or can't honestly debate their ideas without accusing people who disagree with them of it being a Republican talking point." And I did get that sense that they never really delved into, okay, how is this actually going to work? We get that you want all of these great transformative policies, but how's it actually going to work out? And that was one of my biggest gripes with the debates, is they kept it really shallow and they never actually dug into, okay, so whose plan would actually work?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, I think, and I guess this will be our first point of disagreement. Probably, is that at this stage in the game, when you're in the primary, you don't want to necessarily talk about the nitty gritty of policy, because you are going to have to at some point play politics or play legislative writing. I mean, you're going to be working or fighting against the opposing party, so you really don't know how things are going to unfold. So
Right.
there's the opportunity to lay out a grander vision that you then have your staff and technocrats fill in the details there. But yeah, I mean, I think John Delaney did well because he's relatively unknown, and the night was really for Senator Warren and Senator Sanders to lose.
Yeah.
They have more name recognition, and even though Delaney's been campaigning for 2 years now, he really is not.
Yeah,
seeing
we're probably in the minority in thinking that Delaney did really well, and I mean the debate format is kind of, it's very much favors the candidates that are already at the top. So it might be good to talk about the top candidates and how we think they did. Like, Brett, I'm curious, with the first night of the debate, what you thought about Warren versus Sanders and the other players, and then we can talk about night two with Biden after that.
Yeah, well, I'll offer first a disclaimer that in 2014 I briefly worked in Senator Warren's office, so I'm coming from a biased point of view, but I think they did really well. Both of them, the reason why CNN put them together, at least this is the buzz, is that they wanted to have conflict between two of the leading left voices in the Democratic Party. They wanted a fighting match, and they really didn't take the bait.
Oh yeah, they almost formed a pact. They were like looking at each other like, look at these other assholes trying to stop short of giving people full health care. And
yeah, I mean, they really held a I was going to say they held the center because they're physically in the center of the stage, but no, they held the left.
do you think that's going to work out for them? Because it seems like they have very similar constituents. So it seems like if either of them is going to have a shot at going up against Biden, they're going to need to take some constituents away from the other person in their ideological space.
Yeah, I mean, at some point they're going to have to compete against each other, and I think now's not really the time. I mean, we're still about 5 or 6 months away from the first caucus and primary. So, really the name of the game right now for them is to elevate their ideas in the public forum, in the public discourse, so that people are forced to talk about these things. They're forced to talk about Medicare for all, or Senator Warren's universal child care plan,
Mm-hmm.
which is the first that I've ever heard of, that sort of a plan being discussed on the national stage. I mean, it's amazing that's been elevated. It's amazing what a presidential campaign can do for a policy.
Yeah, I've been impressed that I thought that Warren's best moment was when she said, "I don't understand why anyone can run for president just to tell you what we can't do. Like, we
Yeah.
need big ideas. We need to." And when you think about what Trump did that got him elected, he made these huge, massive promises like, we're going to build a wall and Mexico's going to pay for it. We're going to deport every illegal immigrant. We're going to, we're going to take down wall. Like, he literally made the biggest promises. And then what he actually did in office was he pulled back to something that was more of a realistic level of achievement. So it seems like that's kind of what the Democrats are doing. I just wonder if that will play as well with, Democratic voters as, it plays with Republican voters. It seems like a lot of Democrats are more leaning towards like moderate, and if they can't like really map out how it's going to work, then they're less supportive.
It
Yeah.
does seem like there is sort of a sect that's far left, like the Democratic Socialist sect of the Democratic Party. I don't know how that will play into the run against Donald Trump. Is someone that's a Democratic Socialist more likely to win against Trump, or is someone more moderate that can sort of pull center or right of center, left of center, and then everyone on the left? I'm not really sure,
Well,
because you might need an extreme to fight an extreme.
Right. Well, there's actually some interesting stats on that. So they did a poll recently from Politico, which says, which of the following best describes how you feel for the 2020 Democratic primary? 78% of people say we need a candidate who can heal the division in our country. Only 15% said we need a candidate who will fight back. So it seems like the vibe is more, who can we get to heal the damage that Trump has done, at least from the Democrat perspective, rather than getting someone who's going to fight and bring about big structural change. And there's another stat that also supports that, which talks about the most important issues to voters. And the number one issue is dissatisfaction with government/poor leadership. The next biggest issue is illegal immigration. And those are both at 23, 26%. The next issue down is healthcare at only 7%. So even though in the Democratic world it seems like, healthcare is really important and some of these other environment are really important, when you actually look at the polls, it's very clear that on the Democratic side, what matters most is sort of healing the divide and improving the corruption of government. And then on the Republican side, it's really all about immigration, is what it looks like.
That's interesting. And to Justin's greater point, it's illustrative of two different electoral philosophies. One that's espoused by the centrists, like the New Democrats, the Blue Dogs, is that you are winning over a static electorate of people that are likely to vote. So you're going after, I think, as Senator Schumer famously said, for every person we lose in the Rust Belt, we'll gain two voters in the suburbs. The other electoral philosophy is that there's a vast untapped sea of potential voters, people who are so disillusioned with government, so disillusioned with the political circus and how it plays out, that they just tune it out. They don't really vote. Our voting rates are abysmal, even in presidential election years, let alone midterm years. And so the electoral philosophy of I think the left wing of the party, and then other fringe players like the DSA or other left groups, is to access that sea of voters and give them material promises. So even if you are disillusioned by government, you can still say, well, I hate private insurers, I hate health, I
Mm,
hate our healthcare system, and that's supposed to cause this sort of groundswell of support for material policies that will make people's lives better. Um, which one works? I don't know. We'll only know after the election, which I guess
Yeah.
is too late.
right.
But
Yeah.
I mean,
That
that's
is one thing we saw though in 2016, that polls weren't necessarily the most accurate form of data.
mhm.
The polls were showing Trump didn't have a shot in hell to win, really. I mean, some people still predicted that he would, um, but the polls didn't show that he was going to win. We had to
Right.
figure it out at the election.
And it's clear that the reason he did win is because he was by far the most persuasive, and
mm,
the story that he painted of America resonated more than the story that Hillary Clinton told to America. And so I wonder how the current candidates, how well their stories will resonate and how persuasive you guys think they are. Because it seems like, the story that Andrew Yang tells about America, about the wave of automation that's coming and we got to do something now that's not,
mm,
log jammed with bureaucracy and the broken welfare system, compared to the story that Biden tells, which is basically like, hey, everything will be just fine if we can get Trump out of office and go back to the same path that Barack and I had us on, and compared to like Warren's story, which is we need big structural change. Like these are all very, and then it doesn't seem like Harris has like a real story that is rooted in real values and ideology. It seems like she's more of just a player playing the game, even if she's playing it somewhat skillfully. But I'm curious what you guys think about the various stories and how persuasive each candidate is.
well, I think less than or more than Donald Trump's vision for America is, I think what people were drawn to him because of his authenticity.
Hmm.
Uh, I mean, his authenticity revealed that he's a disgusting, boorish, he's a disgusting, boorish, probably horrible person. I mean,
Yeah,
he
he's
was
an
on Jeffrey
authentic
Epstein.
New York asshole.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. I mean, no, exactly, exactly. When he took Ted Cruz's, oh, you have New York values thing, and just ran with it, and he was like, yeah, I'm a brash piece of shit. Sorry, but 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 that really resonated with people because I think during, you know,
There is too much
you know,
political correctness. That absolutely resonated with people.
sure, or just people talking about like politicians talking like a press release,
Mm,
like, oh, we're working hard for America's families. What does that mean? That's like, come
yeah.
on, actually explain how you want to make people's lives better. And for Donald Trump, he was able to find, I think he was able to find, he was able to make, immigrants scapegoats or things like that. But, I think people are drawn to authenticity. And so I think that's probably what's going to help
Hmm.
most of the candidates.
So who do you
Yeah.
think's the most authentic?
I mean, if you want to go on a New York level, probably Bernie. Just because I think for so many people, when he first ran in 2015, I remember his press announcement. It was this tiny little thing in May 2015. There was like 6 reporters there, and people were thinking, "Who is this old man from a state with a weird accent from this state of 600,000 people, like less than Boston, less than Nashville. Like, who is this guy? Why is he saying these things? And does he really have a chance against Secretary Clinton?" And he ran a campaign and he spoke from the heart, and I think people were drawn to that.
Yeah.
Um, but other people in this cycle are doing the same thing. I think Cory Booker is pretty authentic. I think Elizabeth Warren's pretty authentic. I think
See,
that there's
that's interesting because my dad really thought Cory Booker had a good performance too, but something about him just really rubs me the wrong way. I don't know what it is, but it does seem like some people really perceive him as having that X factor, whereas other people are not drawn to him, like me. Um, so I would say, like, from my point of view, the most authentic seems to be I agree. Bernie seems, it's so clear that he believes what he says, like for sure.
He's been
Andrew,
saying it for decades too.
yeah. Oh
Yeah.
yeah, he's got the track record. Andrew Yang talks exactly like you could ask him any question and he'll just say what he actually believes. He doesn't need like a pre-canned sort of response, is what it seems like. Um, and
Yeah,
and I
oh,
think
sorry.
Biden is he's authentic to a degree where even if he's makes a lot of guffaws, he still is someone who clearly has his values, and he also sounds the most presidential. That was something that Scott Adams noticed, is that he has that really good presidential voice. And I'm curious also what you guys think of. We haven't talked about Pete Buttigieg. He is seems like a really strong candidate. However, Scott Adams made another interesting observation on him, which is that he may actually be too smart to be relevant for people. Like he may be too smart, or too smart to be relatable, was what he said. Like he almost
Mm.
comes off with a little bit of an air of smugness, and that may disconnect him from the average voter, even though he may, be the best at actually running the country once, if he got the nomination.
Yeah, I mean, I have noticed a difference between who I think is the most persuasive and what the polls are saying.
Hmm.
I don't necessarily think that, Kamala Harris is the most persuasive person, even though she's kind of up there right now. But I do think that Buttigieg is like he looks like a really smart guy and seems like a smart guy, and that's what I'm drawn towards. I think Andrew Yang is pretty smart. Like I said earlier, I think John Delaney is pretty smart.
Hmm.
I'm curious what you guys thought of Tulsi Gabbard because she got a lot of press after the second night.
She was the most Googled candidate in every
Mhm.
single state after the second
Wow.
debate. And
Jeez.
the first night, the most Googled candidate was Marianne Williamson in every state except for Montana. So
Yeah,
something about those two.
yeah. You know what? I want to change my answer from before. Marianne Williamson is probably the most authentic, just because it's like, where, what
Yeah,
are you?
yeah,
What a dark psychic force. I mean, it's like you don't even need to play on that line. It's just all of her answers. It's very clear that she's not from the political world. She's not used to
hmm,
that kind of circus. Uh,
yeah. She's playing the
but
meta game of persuasion that Trump is so good at, and the other Democrats don't even seem to understand this like meta persuasion game.
well, I think Andrew Yang was. I really liked his performance, and it was because he recognized that everyone else. I mean, everyone else is performing. In his closing statement, he said, "Yes, I know everyone's throwing out these rehearsed attack lines and like putting on makeup and all this stuff." I mean, he broke the fourth wall. He looked
Right,
at the cameras and said, "Yep, everyone knows that this is a big joke. This is a big, farce. We're all
right.
rehearsing. Not actually talking policy. I'm the only one here who's talking about something of pressing concern, which is that the structure of our society is about to change because we tie so much social meaning to what we produce and what we do, uh, that we're not, we're reaching a chasm, and we have no plan for it. So
Right.
yeah, I want to give him authenticity points too. He
Yeah,
is.
yeah. But yeah, Marianne Williamson, I thought that she actually did the best job of articulating why people should join this democratic movement, which is to basically fight back against this dark psychic energy that's been rising up from Trump and instead combat it with love, which obviously sounds ridiculous, but there is a lot of truth to it when you actually think about what she's saying. And it's funny because she definitely represents some slice of the Democratic Party where, like, I saw someone tweeted, they were like, people on the East Coast are like, oh, Marianne Williamson, what a kook. And then people on the West Coast are like, someone exactly like her is my medical doctor. And like I know a lot of people like Marianne Williamson living in LA, so but I don't know if the country would be ready for someone with who uses her type of language.
Yeah, I wonder how she'd play in like North Dakota. Um, I was actually there earlier this year, and I was sitting with these. I was working there, and I was sitting with these guys at a bar, just drinking very cheap beer. It's amazing out there. But they were giving a very candid appraisal of their view of where the Democratic Party's going, and they're easily on the more conservative wing, and I could see them absolutely blanching at the thought of her being the nominee. I guess my point there is that it's easy for us, especially if we live on the coasts, to say like, oh, it's like, no, of course, like there's no one living out there. Like why should their opinions be factored into it? But there are people out there who are, part of the party and they also have a say,
Right.
all the same country.
Yeah. Yeah, but and then to your point about Tulsi Gabbard, it's interesting that she got so many search results, and I bet it's because of her feud with Kamala. So if any of our listeners missed it, basically what happened is the whole night Kamala Harris and everyone else was just piling on to Biden and really trying to attack him. But what ended up happening is the audience started to just sort of feel bad for Biden and sort of see things from his view. And Kamala Harris and some of these other candidates really came off as being like sort of mean-spirited, was my take on it. And at a certain point, Tulsi Gabbard came to Biden's defense and started attacking Kamala Harris's record, saying that she had put away I don't know how many people for smoking marijuana, and then when she was asked about her own marijuana habits, she laughed about it. And that was just absolutely devastating to Kamala Harris. So I wonder what you guys, I mean, first, if you have any thoughts of Tulsi Gabbard, but secondly, do you think, like, what would you advise Kamala Harris to do? Or do you think there's anything she can do that would, make her much more viable as a candidate against someone like Biden?
It did seem like she got a lot of early press for attacking Biden, like calling him a racist, which I think
no
that
one really
was totally
believes.
unfair. Like,
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
I think she got too much press, so she tried to continue those attacks, and then people are like, wait a sec, they're calling her out on her bullshit. So I don't know. I didn't really get a good vibe from her when I was watching the debates. But I did notice, like, also when people were attacking her, she would just say, "Well, you're just wrong,"
Yeah.
or something along that. I was like,
I know,
I
that
mean,
was
at
really
least,
off-putting to me.
yeah. So I don't know if I have a true answer for how I think she can move forward, but those were just my observations watching her.
She also seems to not have real conviction. Like most people, like Bernie, if you ask him a question, even if he hasn't thought of it before, it will fit into his philosophy of how the world should work. But
Mm.
because there's no structural philosophy for how Kamala Harris thinks the world should work, it's hard to predict what she's going to say on an issue. And it seems like she's sort of just testing the waters of what's the most favorable position I could have. And I think that's a problem that Hillary Clinton had too. It's like she would just not respond and then do all of this research and polling data and then come up with her very calculated position on an issue. And voters can see right through that.
I think it's going to be a problem for any Democrat that could be characterized as a centrist or being in the more moderate wing of the party is that, on social issues, no real contest. Everyone's mostly on the same page.
Mm-hmm.
But when it comes to economic issues, Democrats in the center are also trying to win the support of large industries or businesses. They have a lot of
Right.
money.
Right.
Our campaign finance system is geared toward incentivizing policies that benefit people with more material wealth. So
Totally.
you can't go out there and it's just harder for her to walk that line. Versus for Bernie, it's like, well, he's got a philosophy, he can stick right to it, and he can always go back to his stump speech.
Yeah, and he has a true grassroots movement where he has all of these small donors giving him money. And I want to talk about this incentive structure with financing because it's really out of whack. So basically, the rules in this most recent debate is that you have to have at least 65,000 donors, and you need at least 200 donors per state in at least 20 U.S. states. Now, in the next debates in September, the number of donors you need, and it doubles. So you need 130,000 donors. So basically, you can see why they put these incentives in there, because they're trying to incentivize grassroots campaigns where you have lots of small donors from a wide variety of states, so you could sweep the country, like Obama did. But what's actually happening when you look into it is that candidates are spending $70 in advertising to get $1 in a small campaign contribution so that they can reach the minimum number of donors. And they're funding it by having these massive deals with special interest groups and lobbying groups. So it's like a totally perverse incentive structure that is just like this, just a ridiculous circus of getting big money from big special interests and then using that to get like $1 here, $1 there from regular folks. It's ridiculous.
Well, it's like what Tom Steyer is doing. Tom Steyer, the I think former hedge fund manager, he's a billionaire. He's running Need to Impeach, which is a public interest group that's focusing on why we should impeach Donald Trump. And I think there was a Politico report recently where he was asking people to donate pennies, cents, just so that he could meet those thresholds. But I think it's a step in the right direction for the party, is that if we do claim to be a party of everyday people, there shouldn't be an upper crust or an elite that's dictating, which way the party should be going. And so then, you're going to see sort of performances like this where people are funneling money into meeting, a threshold. And hopefully next time, we get around to it, next presidential cycle, we'll have refined those rules even more.
Right. Yeah, I mean, on the Future of Politics, we talked about the idea that you could basically give people, I forget what they call them, like democracy vouchers, I think they call them, which basically allows you, so you get every citizen gets 5 vouchers, with each one being $100 or something, and then you get to choose who you give your vouchers to. So it's more of you have to really speak to the voters so they decide to give you their vouchers, rather than speaking to lobbyists, getting the money, and then just blasting them with Facebook ads and Instagram ads so you can meet the requirements. So yeah.
It's funny you mentioned lobbyists, because so many of the candidates this cycle have sworn off of contributions from registered lobbyists. So if you have to register federally if you want to partake in lobbying activities, which are pretty narrowly defined. So there's really an undercount of how many actual lobbyists most people would consider. Most people would consider thousands of more people lobbyists than the federal government does. Mm-hmm. But Bernie Sanders' campaign doesn't accept contributions from lobbyists, I believe. Elizabeth Warren's doesn't. I don't think Pete Buttigieg's does. One thing I think is fascinating is that Kirsten Gillibrand, the senator from New York, she does not accept contributions from federal lobbyists. And I always thought that was an interesting specific, because, well, that means that she can receive contributions from New York State registered lobbyists. And Lord knows there's plenty of banks in New York that can pay lobbyists enough that their contributions can filter in. So I don't know. I thought that was kind of an interesting loophole that she built in for herself. But
yeah, I mean, it's interesting because when you look at the actual amount of cash that each of these candidates have, Donald Trump obviously has the most because he's pretty much locked in as the Republican contender. Bernie Sanders has the next most. He has $27 million cash on hand. And then I was really surprised by this. Pete Buttigieg has the next most cash on hand with $22 million. And then Elizabeth Warren has $19 million. So it is interesting. It does seem like Pete Buttigieg could make a serious push given how much money he still has on hand to be spent.
Yeah, Pete Buttigieg got he's kind of seen as being uh, the candidate for a lot of people from the Obama administration, like a lot
Mm,
of people that served as appointees. I know that there are a few people that have already endorsed him who served in the Obama administration. So I think he's seen as kind of the torchbearer. And within the centrist wing, it's him, Senator Harris, and I'm sorry, former Vice President Biden. Though he was a senator at one point, I guess. I guess it's not wrong.
hmm
But they're kind of seen as like carrying the torch from that era, and so they're fighting over the people that bundled and contributed en masse to President Obama's campaigns.
Right. Now, I want to get into some predictions. And before we get into like the worst case, best case, most likely, I just want to get a sense for if we're thinking of this like a basketball bracket, what do you guys think is just a very likely scenario as far as who are going to be the final three Democrat contenders, then who will be the final two, who's going to win, who could actually beat Trump if they do win? Like, I mean, I have my own thoughts, but I want to hear your guys' thoughts on who's going to win the primary most likely, and then of the potential primary winners, who would actually have the best shot at beating Trump?
Man.
Not who you want to win, who do you actually
Yeah.
think is going to win?
Well, I mean, it's hard to vote or hard to predict against Biden right now, I think, just because he's been in the White House as vice president. He has such a strong support from Obama era voters. So I think that he's probably the most likely, if I just were to assign a probability of who
Most
has
likely
the
to
best
win the
chance.
primary or the general, or both?
So I would say that he has the best chance to win the primary, but also he might be the best option against Trump as well. I don't know. There's so many factors to this. It's hard to say because he's the establishment. I mean, it's basically a non crooked Hillary version of the Democrat. I
Right,
don't think
right.
he's as corrupt as people perceived Hillary to be. So maybe he's kind of like her replacement,
hmm
and I think that might be the case. That
Brett, what do you think?
I I'll tell you, I think anyone who knows for certain is probably trying to sell a book. But
Justin, when's your book coming out?
yeah, I'll buy it. Um, I think it's going to be. I mean, it's Biden's to lose, at least by polling. But then again, polls completely missed the rise of
yeah.
Donald Trump. I mean, I you know I put very little faith in traditional metrics nowadays. But it is Biden's to lose by those metrics. But I think Harris can probably do, within the centrist wing. I think Harris actually has a pretty strong chance, and my reasoning for that is based off of the timing of the primaries. So California moved its primary system or its primary date up earlier, and Nevada is already one of the early primary states, and Nevada generally, you get a lot of crossover between states. Candidates from Massachusetts tend to do pretty well in New Hampshire. So she could make a pretty early swing and gather a lot of delegates and a lot of momentum. And
Hmm.
then as she swings through the South, where there are a lot of more conservative black voters, she could pick up a lot of votes just based off of her own identity as a black woman. Um,
Yeah.
but
Although I would
but
say it does seem like she doesn't have that strong of support in the African American community as that you would expect because she's has this perception as being a cop who's locked up a lot of low-level drug offenders and that kind of thing. That may hurt her.
Yeah, I mean, I think Biden's polling better among black voters in the South, at least in South Carolina.
Hmm
I've seen, but again, primaries, elections, a month is a lifetime, so anything could change. I think when it comes down to Bernie and Warren, I think uh, that's even. I mean, that's just as tough.
Yeah.
Bernie has a lot infrastructure. He has groups like Our Revolution, the Justice Democrats, the Sanders Institute. All of these are institutions that can put out their own messages. They have their own email lists. He has a little bit more. He's a little bit more recent in terms of his progressive bona fides. But then Senator Warren also, could be a good compromise candidate between the two wings because she's well liked by the center. Progressives like her too. She was kind of like the OG Bernie, in the Senate. I mean,
Yeah.
he's been around for forever, but she had, before he really started running, she was pretty well known in the Senate for her progressive policies.
Yeah, it does seem like Warren would be the preferred candidate for the DNC over Bernie because she's a little fresher, maybe not perceived as extreme. Yeah, I mean, I guess my own prediction as far as how I think things are going to pan out, I think it's either going to come down to Biden versus Warren or Biden versus Harris in the primary. I don't think it's as likely to see Biden versus Bernie, although that is a possibility. And I think if Biden goes up against Harris, I think Biden's going to win because I think the dynamic is going to be, oh, Harris is kind of mean and people are going to feel bad for old Joe. And I don't think that's a good dynamic for Harris. Like, she's a great attack dog, but I think that may actually work against her with someone as lovable as Joe Biden. If it's Biden versus Warren, I actually think it's possible Warren could win because Warren does have a lot of ground support with, people who just love the idea of getting better health care and that sort of thing. However, if Warren beats Biden in the primary, I think it's very small chance she'll beat Trump because she has a lawyerly way of talking, which has served her well in her career. But I don't see that resonating with voters. And also, if you just look at the issues, like, it seems like Biden has a really clear argument where it's basically just like Biden's position pretty much neutralizes Trump's arguments that the Democrats are crazy socialists and they're looking to do all of this massive change and it's going to tank the economy. Like, Biden can say, look, the economy was great when we were doing, under Obama and we had Medicare for all. Like, I've done it. It's not risky. This is not some new risky socialist agenda. So that would totally neutralize Trump's biggest argument. And then if you put up Trump against Warren and you start talking about things like giving free health care to illegal immigrants, which she's in favor of and Warren's other, Bernie and others are in favor of, or things like decriminalizing the border, I mean, that is not going to play well on a national stage.
Yeah, I don't think you would convert any Trump fans by
Right.
putting either of those two against him.
I also it seems like someone needs to ask what would happen if you totally decriminalized illegal border crossings. Like, I've never heard a Democratic candidate actually answer the question. I mean, sometimes they'll say, "Oh, well, there would just be civil proceedings." But if you cannot detain people who illegally cross the border, then what do you do? Like, I haven't heard like a good answer to that.
Oh, you go ahead, Brett.
I think there was a pilot program during the Obama administration that involved electronic monitoring of people who, were awaiting official immigration proceedings. I don't know whether it was for asylum or for some other form of residency. So I guess that could be the option that they would have to, there would have to be some sort of accountability mechanism, right?
Right.
Because for other civil infractions like, I don't know, parking tickets or jaywalking, you theoretically could just let those rack up and
Right.
it's really not seen as a priority. But even then, if you introduce electronic monitoring, as a civil libertarian, that wigs me out. That wigs me out hard because then we are effectively creating a sort of test population for the government's monitoring of people without a warrant. and tracking their behavior.
Right.
It's a very scary precedent.
Plus, you want to incentivize people to do the legal thing, to apply
Yeah.
for asylum at a port of entry. And so it seems like solutions where you greatly increase legal immigration would be much better, and incentivizing people towards legal immigration and legal asylum would be much better than just trying to fix the Trump administration's problems, which is based on how they manage things, not really based on the law, with a band-aid solution that doesn't really get at the heart of the immigration issue.
Yeah, I mean, our immigration laws really haven't been substantively updated since I think the 80s. And the world's changed a lot. And I mean, we need to, at the very least, we need to fund and authorize more asylum judges, administrative law judges to be at ports of entry and other areas so that they can easily adjudicate, claims of asylum or other immigration claims. I mean,
Right.
we're operating under a completely different system, and I think there's resistance to actually providing substantive changes because this is something that politicians can run on, and it gins up their base. It gets people out to vote. It's a polarizing
Right.
issue, and what's disgusting is that ultimately there are people at stake, right? Like there are
Yes,
people
yes.
who.
Right. Well, Biden got a lot of flack for saying that, hey, if immigrants have a PhD, we should keep them. And then Cory Booker went after him and said, this is exactly what's wrong. Basically, if you do that, you're only going to take in people from Scandinavian countries, and it's not
Well,
right.
that's not true. I mean,
Yeah, that's what he was
I
implying, is what it
I
seemed like.
my Uber to the airport was the driver was a man from Armenia who had an advanced degree. I think he had a PhD in optical engineering or something, or maybe it was food engineering. I forget. But
Yeah.
you're not gonna just get people from Scandinavia. But
I mean,
uh,
Canada has a merit-based immigration system that seems to work really well for them. What do you guys think the policy should be? Should it be merit-based? Should we have this, family-based immigration? How big of a chunk of immigration should the, asylum seeking be? These are all really difficult questions, and we might not answer them here, but I'm curious what you guys think would have the best results, let's say, in just like overall happiness and assimilation into America.
Yeah, that's such a hard question. I don't even know, how I would begin to answer it. What I would say though is we need to figure out a lot of internal issues beforehand. Like we can figure out issues like the efficiency of healthcare, housing, all of those things first, and then we could ideally allow way more immigration and have a bigger immigrant population, and then we can have a better process for integrating them into U.S. citizens. So again, that's not really an answer because I have no idea how to really fix the problem or what would be the ideal solution. But I do think we need to solve some issues first before we can allow everybody in, give them health care like some people are proposing and everything else. But we do need to be a country that is good, that helps people, that helps out the world, I think. So,
Yeah.
yeah, I mean, I don't know the particulars of what consequences would come based off of what little technical regulations or laws or whatever you put into place. But I do think what's important is what you said, Justin, is that we want to be good and we want to help people. And so if there's instances where people are suffering immensely in their home countries, either because of past U.S. involvement and regime change, like in Honduras and Guatemala, or there's state-sponsored repression of people based off of certain protected classes and characteristics, then yeah, we should be working to bring them to safety in the United States. But then along with that, I think that there should be an understanding that when you come here, you adopt the ideas that I think make the country really a cool place to live. Like
Mhm.
you are able to freely express yourself, even if it's saying something that's offensive, as long as it's not an incitement to violence. You can paint, you can do whatever you want, you can do that. You need to be dedicated to the idea of due process, of recognizing the importance of the individual, and that society is a collection of individuals who all have inalienable rights. So, as long as that's maintained and enshrined, then yeah, I mean, like you said, Justin, it's like way too big of an issue. I mean, you could do an entire episode just
Right.
on that, you know.
Yeah.
What do you think, Mattimore?
Well, I pretty much agree with you guys. I think that part of America's power is that we're perceived as this city on a hill, the Statue of Liberty, and that we've lost that in the Trump administration. And that's part of what made us so influential is that all these countries looked up to us, and that sort of allowed us to take on the role of being a leader. But we've lost that persuasive ability because we've become more nationalistic. So I'd like to see us return to, being a country founded on liberty while still not totally discounting the 40% of Americans that support Trump, the 44% of Americans that support Trump. So I think we need to be a little bit more realistic in our policies. Like I think decriminalizing the border is just not a well thought out solution. And then the other big issue, which I want to get your guys' thoughts on, that came up a lot during the debate, is healthcare. And there's the notion of giving free healthcare to illegal immigrants, whereas a lot of Americans don't even have good healthcare now. But the other issue is, do you allow people to keep their private insurance, or do you basically outlaw private insurance and just have one government single payer system? And this is something that Kamala Harris has kind of flopped on. Like she basically said, "Oh, you can keep your private insurance," but then the other candidates pointed out, "Oh no, your plan specifically disallows people to keep their private insurance," and she just kind of denied it and was like a deer in
You're
the
wrong.
headlights. Yeah, she's like, "I think you're actually too old and stupid to understand my point." That's like basically her response. Um, but there is this sense that if we believe in capitalism and we believe that the best ideas rise to the top, why not let people keep their private plan if the government plan is going to be so much better and so much more cost effective? Won't the government plan just win out naturally if you put it up against the plans that have been criticized as being so broken? So that's kind of my feeling on it, but I wanted to get your guys' thoughts on what the right healthcare system would be for Democratic candidates.
Yeah. So with healthcare, the issue is there's a lot of inefficiency in healthcare delivery. We're the most expensive and least efficient right now.
Hmm.
And I think one of the issues that people are bringing up is, if we keep the private healthcare insurance, we keep the old incentives, um, and that might also leak into a public plan. That might all those inefficiencies might just be carried over to the public plan as well.
Mm.
Because there's a lot of ways that we can improve healthcare, but I think we would need to do a big structural change to the entire healthcare system first. But the problem with that is I do still believe in capitalism. I just think we need to rearrange the incentive structure. So if there are good private plans that don't incentivize doctors to just give out prescriptions willy-nilly, or any of the other issues that we see systemically, then I think we'll be in a good position to have people choose what the best healthcare plan is.
That's a really good point. I think it's important to keep in mind that when we talk about capitalism as it relates to healthcare, is that markets for providing remedies to maladies, to health problems, don't operate in the same way as other markets do. So if I'm in anaphylactic shock, I'm not going to be looking at local hospitals and trying to determine, well, is this going to meet my deductible? Is this going to,
Right.
I can't I don't have information. I'm not an informed consumer. So I think markets fundamentally break down, which is why it's important. You'll now see almost all of the candidates now talk about universal coverage, however they want to put that into effect, whether through like a patchwork of insurers or Medicare for all. But I think it's important that you have, at the very, very minimum, a public option so that people can go to, it doesn't need to entirely be single payer, but people will have an option that they can go to that everyone is automatically enrolled into. All of your taxes will go towards this. If you don't want to participate in it, then fine. Frankly, I would be loath to pay more to an insurance company which operates off of collecting as much money as possible and paying out as little as possible. That's just how insurance works. So, I think that there is still a place, though, for small private insurers if you want to insure against very specific, health problems, or maybe if you want more elective surgeries, things like that. Frankly, I think if you as a consumer want to wrangle with a health insurer, good luck. I mean, that's you can take that. I'm not certain how it's done in other countries, but I believe that there are private insurers in countries where there is universal coverage where they can sort of expedite your ability to see a doctor. So, maybe there's a fast lane that you pay for. But
I really liked Elizabeth Warren's line on this where she said that insurance companies do not have a God-given right to extract this many billions of dollars out of our healthcare system each year. And it's like, why do we have, like, why not just give healthcare efficiently and optimize for health rather than optimizing for making profits off of sickness and maladies?
Yeah, there is something that always gets brought up into this discussion is that healthcare costs or healthcare expenditures amount to between a sixth and a fifth of our GDP, between 16 to 20%. Yeah, that's huge, huge. But and that's usually used as a justification for why we cannot change the system as it exists. But that's the broken windows fallacy. That's the idea that if I go around into a shop, down a main street, and I break all of the windows on local shops, great. I've created a need for the window makers.
Yeah,
so
seriously.
It's like, no, I mean, that's what you're subscribing to if you believe that nothing should change, is that you believe that 1/5 of our economy should be a disease economy, and that we should maintain this so that insurers and anyone else involved with the provision of medical care can inflate what they should be making from the public. So, I wanted to point that out because I think that's probably going to come up a lot in future debates or future discussions, is this idea that we shouldn't touch anything because, Lord knows if we do that, we'll upend a fifth of the economy.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. Now I want to get into the future scenarios next and hear your guys' thoughts on how you think the future of the Democratic Party is going to play out. My last question, just before we get into that, is on the debate format itself and how you would like to see the debate format changed. What does the debate format incentivize? What types of behaviors? Which types of candidates does it give favor to? I mean, I'll just open it up with a tweet that I thought was really funny, which is like, CNN, Elizabeth Warren, do you hate Bernie Sanders? Elizabeth Warren, no, in fact, we agree on many. CNN, okay, shut up. Bernie, do you hate Hickenlooper? Bernie, not really, but we disagree on the positive. I said, don't care. Who else? Beto, do you hate? Because they do egg candidates on to create these viral controversial moments that can then be replayed over and over again on cable news and on social media. And that's what gets the most exposure. So these candidates are basically trying to create these moments, and they're attacking each other, which plays right into the Republicans' hands, because they're going to have all of this artillery fire they can reuse in the national debates. But yeah, I mean, and then obviously the amount of time they give is another thing. They give like all the time to the candidates that are already at the top, which makes it really hard for any of the other candidates to make any sort of dent on the national polls. But yeah, I'm interested to hear your guys' thoughts on what's broken about the debate structure and how could it be fixed. And Brett, I know you used to do debate, right? So you probably have more insights about this than most.
Yeah, it's I mean, really, in a perfect world, we just wouldn't have those debates. I mean, the debates as they exist now are theater, and they exist for CNN, for any of those networks to have clips that they can play because they need to fill airtime, especially if they're 24-hour. God, that's a lot of air that they need to fill. But in terms of debates, I think it would be more interesting if they. Well, I'll start with the good. I'm really happy now that they've finally started stopping candidates from going on and on and on. Like, they actually have teeth. They'll say, thank you, thank you, thank you. They'll shut down a candidate. And their rules for rebuttals now are a little better. So, if you're mentioned by name, you get 30 seconds to rebut it. But still, I think Andrew Yang's criticism in the second debate, his closing remarks, still rings pretty true. It's that's all part of the circus, and it's all an opportunity for people to, and almost every political debate is this way, is that it's really an opportunity for them to just point out or just to promote their policies and their campaigns. It's rarely ever to discuss issues of high import or, philosophical.
To get to the heart
whatever.
of what the best solution actually is.
No. It's about promoting yourself and your platform. So if a simplified answer is, we'd probably do away with debates,
I mean, what about, like, I know Scott Adams and Joe Rogan have both talked about this. What if instead we did like long form podcast debates where maybe with two candidates at a time, and that way everyone gets to like really talk out their issues in detail without just having to, format it into 60-second, 30-second sound bites.
You would end up having, I mean, I really like that idea because there's nothing, well, no, there's a lot more. Being on a podcast is very vulnerable, right? It's just flow, stream of consciousness, and stream of consciousness talking is usually not great for politicians. They all end up saying something wrong. It's worked out remarkably well for Donald Trump. I have no idea why, But
I think people are more sensitive to authenticity now. And even if you say the most absurd things, they like that more than if you say the right thing in a very lawyerly, like careful way.
Totally. Yeah, I really like that idea. I think I'm just laughing because I like imagining Joe Rogan just like asking people about, asking people about DMT and CBD or whatever.
He actually talked to Tulsi Gabbard and Andrew Yang on his podcast. I think Tulsi Gabbard's been on there a couple of times, but I love those. Like, you can actually know what they're thinking, and maybe that's why I think those two are very authentic, is because I've heard their thoughts.
Yeah, they come off as real people
for several hours. Yeah. So I would love that. And I think also one of the issues right now is there are 20 candidates. Like, it's hard to have any nuance in conversation when the moderators are trying to get the thoughts of 20 people and, everything else. So I think it'll probably get a little bit better, or I think it usually gets a little better once the race dwindles down a little bit. And, towards the end when there's just primaries, and then when you have the Republican versus Democrat in the general election cycle. So, I I do like the idea of the podcast, though. That would be my personal preference. If I were just talking from a consumer perspective, that
Yeah.
would be my
Oh, we
option.
could have him on Hence the Future, and we'll solve the whole political issue right here and now.
Let's
Good
do
luck.
it.
All right.
Brett,
Well,
can
I
you
don't
that's
help
know.
us out?
You could probably get. Hold on. So I have a list of all of the candidates. I bet you could probably get Mike Gravel. You
oh, I
guys know
love
him?
Mike Gravel on
Yeah, I
Twitter.
do too.
He is hilarious.
He has high school students running his like campaign.
I believe it. It
His
seems like
his
he's a
entire
parody account. It's hard to believe that it's not a parody account.
he was running, so the DNC had rules that said like you're not allowed to, uh, you're not allowed to run just for the sake of bringing stuff into discussion. You actually have to run because you want to be president. And so he said, okay, great, fine. So instead of actually doing the whole fundraising thing to pay for staff, setting up, that's a whole mess. He just got some high school students, and they're doing a great job. I got to
Yeah,
give them.
seriously.
Yeah, sounds like a fun gig. I wish I could do that.
Yeah.
But yeah, so I don't know. You could probably get Mike Gravel. I don't know, maybe Jay Inslee, governor of
Yeah.
Washington.
Oh, is he the one that's running mostly on a climate change
hmm
campaign?
Yeah.
Yeah.
A lot of women voters think he's sexy. Like I saw
Oh.
one person on Twitter was like Jay Inslee's looking pretty daddy tonight. And then like had like, all of these retweets and like so he's got that going for him, but I don't think the single issue thing is gonna play well for him, unfortunately.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, which is a shame because out of all of the issues, and this is here's my take is out of all of the issues where there should be that could be a single issue, a viable single issue campaign, it's climate change. I mean, that's
Yeah.
Mhm.
everything exists within the context of the planet. So
But Andrew
uh,
Yang's point was a smart one, which is that the U.S. is only 15% of total emissions. So even if we literally brought the U.S. emissions to zero, it wouldn't make that big of a dent compared to India and China and Africa.
yeah,
He was talking also though about exporting clean energy and clean technology,
That's
which
really
would
smart.
which would have an impact on the other 85%.
That's a good
So,
point. Creating a carbon
um,
sink too.
yeah,
Mhm.
yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. So there's definitely a lot that can be done, and I agree, Brett. I mean, that's the same thing that I would, I think that that's the most important thing, or it's the most important thing to me. Um, but I felt like it didn't get a lot of coverage because a lot of the talk is about healthcare, gun violence, and other stuff. But they at least gave it a fair shot, which was nice.
Well, I actually have a stat on this as
Hmm.
well. And it's interesting because you basically see over time the polarization of the climate issue, like where now more people than ever see global warming as being important to them personally. 72% of people believe global warming is extremely, very, or somewhat important to them. But the 28% that don't believe it's important are like very staunchly like don't even believe it's happening. So there is this polarization, but just the sheer numbers are moving in favor of doing something about climate change. So I
Hmm.
think you guys are right that it's an important issue and it's going to become increasingly important as we get more hurricanes and flooding and that sort of thing.
well, and the Syrian refugee crisis and the refugee crisis on the southern border have direct links to climate change. I mean,
Right.
in equatorial countries, the wet bulb temperature, the point at which heat and humidity are both so high that you cannot wick sweat away from your body cannot cool down. That's approaching rapidly for equatorial countries. So, I mean, you can't seriously expect people are going to just cook to death. They're going to move elsewhere. So you have to come up
Right.
with a way to maintain our institutions and government while also potentially handling a huge influx of people. Either that, or or you figure out a way to put the climate back to where it was.
Yeah.
Which
Yeah.
I don't know, like if we want to do like the Matrix, where like we blot out the sky, or
Well, that's the perfect segue into our worst case scenario. Justin, what is the worst case scenario?
Worst case scenario.
Yeah, so when I was thinking about the worst case scenario, it's more in terms of my own philosophy. Um, and I think we do see a movement towards democratic socialism right now. And that in and of itself is not necessarily a bad thing. I'm not totally against democratic socialism, but what I do see is a sort of combative nature against capitalism in general. Like I see some people viewing capitalism the same way that others view communism. And I think if the Democratic Party moves towards that and we become more and more extreme, then we're going to see a time when the government is so powerful. And I think right now, even if we go into it with good intentions, over decades, that might lead to situations like Venezuela. And maybe, I mean, I know this is like probably not that likely, but I think if you give people too much power, then it'll always be used in a corrupt way, no matter how good the intentions were to start off. So that's kind of the worst case, is like progressively getting more and more extreme, leading almost to communism pretty much. So that's sort of my worst case. What do you guys think?
I think my worst case, and I imagine we're talking about the future of the party here, is that the worst case is that we come out of this not thinking that politics is about changing society. And it's important to recognize that, democracy always functioned way back into ancient times as a way to successfully resolve what would be a civil war, right?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, you have two opposing parties. There's rules for how you interact, how you engage, and whoever wins that then gets to enact change that's backed by the force of law on how society operates. And so I think that the worst case scenario is for politics to not be seen as a way to make people's lives better, but to keep it as something that's just more of a circus, And you can always argue that it's always been a circus to some extent, but people should never forget that, that there is change that can be made. You just need to actually get involved, and you need to be willing to think, and you need to be willing to put something on the line. I mean, I know that in September, there's going to be a general strike, I think focused on the climate. And 100 years ago, it was not seen as too radical. I mean, it was considered kind of radical, but 100 years ago, people were willing to go on a strike and say, nope, the way that this is working, the way that this is proceeding does not work for me. I'm withholding my productive capability for the day, and I'm going to be angry about it. And I'm going to make sure that everyone knows that I'm angry, provided that you aren't, continuing to violence. If you express your dissatisfaction, if you make it known, and you actually do see politics as a vehicle for change, then I think we can avoid the worst. But I think that the worst would be if people say, well, it's just a circus anyway, I'm just going to be resigned to doing nothing, because we see that the consequences of that are pretty bad.
Yeah. Yeah, people losing hope in the democratic system is a big concern of mine as well. And I was thinking about this sort of similar to you guys, both of you guys, in the sense that, the worst thing that could happen to the Republican Party is it goes so far to the right that it becomes a fascist regime. The worst thing that could happen to the Democratic Party is that it becomes so extreme that it becomes a communist regime, like a true communist regime. And at least in the countries where communism has been tried, in basically 100% of the cases, it has resulted in a corrupt small group of people exerting way more control than the people bargained for on them so that they can improve their own circumstances for the people in power. So that's my concern. However, I do think a capitalist path to communism could work, just given how much we're producing in this country and the wealth that could be spread around to help a lot of people. So my biggest concern in the worst case scenario is that we try to implement communist policies before we actually fix the problems of government itself. I think if we fix the problems of government itself first, like we fix the rules around gerrymandering, we have a separate committee that determines the right way to draw district lines separate from Democratic and Republican input. Like that would be great. If we also have another rule that was proposed where members of Congress cannot become a lobbyist after Congress. And we could even increase the salaries of congressmen and congresswomen so they don't feel like they need to become a lobbyist afterwards. And if we make some of these structural changes so that the Democratic Party is truly able to represent the will of the majority of the people, then I think we can do things like implementing a freedom dividend where every American gets $1,000 a month, implementing healthcare, universal healthcare for all citizens, because it can be made in a way that's not corrupt with loopholes and, special winks to the people who give those candidates the money. Like, they came up in this campaign that Kamala Harris's healthcare plan was in part drafted by someone who was basically in bed with like big healthcare, big pharma. And, that's all too common. So yeah, my worst case is we put the cart before the horse. We put communism before fixing this government structure that will allow us to divide up wealth in an equitable way without special interests getting in the way.
Well, what do you guys think about the best case then?
Best case scenario.
Yeah, so I can start. So my best case is, well, first I'll just say, like, as far as the candidates, what do I think would be the best? And I would say that, first of all, I would love if Yang became president, but I don't think it's that likely. So as far as like a likely best case, I would say having Biden and Buttigieg as a ticket, I think that is probably the most likely to end up beating Trump. And the reason I would like them together is because I think Buttigieg has all of like the right vision for the right, policies, and he's just a very smart guy. So I feel like he could handle a lot of the operation that Sleepy Joe might not be able to handle as well. But Sleepy Joe could seriously, take down Trump just because he's got such good, people have high favorability rankings of Biden. And he sort of has this nostalgic air of going back to the way things used to be before our values got totally thrown out of whack by Trump and grab him by the pussy and Russiagate and all of this ridiculous stuff that we've been dealing with in the last couple of years. So that's my best case as far as candidates. And then as far as the Democratic Party, I would say, the Democratic Party, if it can truly focus on representing the will of the majority of people, I think that's the best path. The Republicans, I think they're going to be all about representing the will of rural Americans and sort of more traditional Americans, whatever that means. But for Democrats, I think the best case would be they just focus on representing the will of the majority of all citizens, all voters.
I think it would be really cool to see Andrew Yang as the Secretary of Labor.
Yeah.
On an aside, I think that's actually, if there's the biggest thing that's threatening the world of labor right now, it's automation. He's the only presidential candidate, really the only public figure in politics that's talking about it.
Yeah.
So, hopefully hopefully that, I don't know, that would be a smart appointment. I
Yeah,
think
I
that would be
couldn't
Yeah.
an
I couldn't
interesting one.
see him as VP, but I could see him as like Secretary of Commerce or some
In terms
position.
of, in terms of who would make a good ticket, there's just so many people I can't even choose. But one thing that I do think is important is that uh, whoever's on the ticket, it should not be, uh, it shouldn't be two white people and probably two men either. I think it's important to recognize, and that's not saying that there's something essential about people's characteristics, but there's a great symbolic power in in people from smaller communities, marginalized communities, in seeing someone become attain highest office. So I think it's important that that at least be recognized and considered. Again, I don't think that those characteristics create an essential profile of someone. Like, I don't think if you are white,
Right.
you're going to think a certain way, nor if you're black, you're going to think a certain way, or if you're Latino or Hispanic, you're going to think a certain way. But it does provide, some level of perspective that should be included.
Hmm. Although, but Buttigieg has the young and gay perspective, which is quite
That's
different
true.
from the old and straight perspective.
Yeah, I mean, that's something to also consider. Definitely.
What would your ideal ticket be?
Too
Can't
tough.
say.
Too tough. I don't know. I mean, I'd like to see someone from the left wing of the party because ultimately it comes down to policy, and I tend to skew left. So I would like to see Warren or Bernie at least, you know, somewhere there. What I think would be really interesting is if whoever is the vice presidential candidate should be someone from the Senate. And my reasoning for that is that the vice president, as the president of the Senate, uh, can act on procedural matters unless they change the rules somehow or they amend the Constitution. But right now the vice president is mostly relegated to state functions and taking on a big public affairs campaign, that kind of thing. It would be really interesting uh, to see the vice president then decide to just start mucking around in the Senate. And, that seems to be an intractable area where it's hard to enact change. So it'd be interesting to see the interplay between a rather ossified part of the legislature and a now more robust executive branch, which has become more robust, ever since, I mean, FDR, Lincoln, you know.
Yeah.
I think that would be cool.
By the way, interesting stat is that people talk about how the president's approval ratings are somewhat low at like, 40, 44%. Congress's approval ratings are 17%. That means, and this is from July 2019, very recent, 76% of Americans disapprove of the way Congress is handling its job. So I think you're spot on when you say that we need to have a better system for making Congress do what it's intended to do.
You know what I love about that is that the incumbency rate is still in the 90s. So it's like people are like, yeah, I totally love my guy. I hate everyone else's guy, uh,
Yeah.
which I think is fascinating. Um, it's a little myopic, but whatever. Uh, so yeah, it would be interesting to see sort of an injection, a more interplay between the executive and the legislative.
Hmm.
I think that's a really good point.
What's your best case, Justin?
Yeah, I mean, in terms of the ticket, kind of like you said, Mattimore, I would love if Andrew Yang was on the ticket. He's my favorite. I think he has very real solutions to everything. Um, I'm not sure. I mean, I also like Buttigieg, and I think he would be a good vice president. I don't know if that's too male. I mean, there's an Asian guy and a gay guy, which, there's some diversity there. Um, but I do take your point also, Brett, that we probably do need to see a female in there soon because um, it's something we've sort of been lacking in the U.S. And we need to have that diversity of perspective in the White House. But in terms of the best case for the party as a whole, I think the kind of like you were saying, Mattimore, if we can fix structural changes, the Democratic Party has views and philosophies that I totally agree with for the most part. Like everything that's being talked about healthcare, everything that's being talked about the climate, everything else that they're talking about, I'm pretty much all for. But we do need to fix some of the structural changes. We need to change the incentive structure with a lot of government policies and rules and really revitalize capitalism where it matters. And maybe that is not healthcare. Maybe we have like certain things that are totally public and run by the government, and we can kind of leave the rest, let the market optimize the rest. So I think, in the best case, we can fix those changes, and the views of, the current Democrats can win out in the end, because to me, I think that they're the best ideas and they're the actual long lasting ideas that will, people in 100 years will not look back on the Democratic Party today and say, like, oh, these people were crazy. I think we will look back that way on the other party, most likely, in a lot of their policies.
Mm-hmm.
So I think in the best case, we can actually make the changes that we want to make.
Yeah, I forget who it was, but someone, might have been Sam Harris, said that when we look back in 100 years, or this actually might have been Rucker Bregman, he said the things that will be perceived as being horrible that we're doing today are our treatment of animals, our treatment of immigrants,
Mm.
I think, and then the treatment of the environment, of the planet.
Mm.
And those are the three areas that we're really not doing a good job on right now. So,
Yeah. Yeah. I want to add one more thing, which is I really hope that the Democratic Party becomes a party of, I'd say it's like the party of John Rawls. John Rawls is a political philosopher who had this idea that if there were a lottery that determined your life, you had, you had the likelihood of living a life destitute, without a house, without health care, without adequate access to food, all of that, and that were determined by lottery, you would obviously not want to buy into that system. I wouldn't want to buy into a system where by random chance I could be, destitute and impoverished. So I think that, the Democratic Party should embrace fundamental tenets like, yep, you have a right to housing, you have a right to health care, you have a right to food, you have a right to, these things, maybe like a second Bill of Rights, kind of like what FDR talked about.
mm-hmm.
And that, they really champion those things because they are material elements that make people's lives better. And that's the whole point of society, making people's lives better.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, let's move on to the most likely scenario.
Most likely scenario.
So I'll start off because I have this interesting, I don't know if you guys have heard about this, but the 13 keys to the White House. Have you guys heard of this? This was,
No.
so basically it's Alan Lichtman, who he was on, I think he was on Bill Maher recently, but basically he talks about using data science. You can predict who's going to win an election based on these 13 questions. And if you ask these 13 questions and more than 5 of them are false, then that means the challenger is going to beat the incumbent. If less than 5 of them are false, then that means the incumbent is going to win. So I have these 13 indicators right here, and let's just go down them real quick, and we'll see how it's looking, if Trump's going to win. So the first is, after the midterm elections, the incumbent party holds more seats in the House than before. So that one is false, right?
False.
The Republicans lost the House. So that one's false. So far we have one of the 5 keys have been turned. The next one is that there's a serious contest for the incumbent party nomination. That would be like if Kasich really made a run against Trump. That's not going to happen. The next one is incumbency. The incumbent party candidate is the sitting president. Okay, yes, that's going to be one, but it's not a key. The next is that there's no significant third party candidate. There probably isn't going to be one.
Mm.
Then, the short-term economy is good. That's true. The long-term economy is good. That also seems true. The
Yeah, I don't know.
I would
No?
go against that. I would say that the general sentiment is people expect some sort of recession and sort of view where we are now as a bubble
Yeah.
in
Yeah.
some sense. Now
Okay, let's
there's
turn that as a key. I agree. Although the way this is phrased is that real per capita economic growth during the term equals or exceeds mean growth during the previous two terms. So it's a
I
very
don't think that I
specific.
don't know if that's the case.
I
I
don't think it's.
yeah
Yeah.
Yeah, I tried looking into it, but I didn't have enough time to like
yeah
fully delve into what the math is.
yeah.
But okay, so let's consider that a key. So far we have two of the five keys turned.
Mhm.
The next is policy change. The incumbent administration affects major changes in national policy. I think we can consider that true based on what he's
True.
done with
Yeah.
immigration and North Korea and whatever.
Mhm.
Social unrest. There is no social unrest. What do you guys think?
Yeah, I think
Mm.
false. I
I don't.
think
I don't
there's a
think it's
ton of
that
social
bad.
unrest.
It's not that bad.
I mean, how are we defining that? Like, it's
Yeah.
not. It's not like we're not at Venezuela, but
Should we
I don't know.
turn it?
There's
All right, fine. Let's
that
turn it. Let's say there's
that
social.
makes it more exciting.
Okay.
We could count this and the long-term prospects as half turns if we needed
Well,
to.
for now, let's say we have three of the five. By the way, you have to get to six keys for it to be. It's just
Okay.
that the five is like the more or less number.
Okay.
So the next is scandal. The incumbent administration is untainted by a major scandal. I would
Well,
say
that
that's false. He has a major scandal.
But untainted. I mean, I don't think his supporters really view them as, bad things. I don't know for
Yeah, but
sure,
you
but
can't say Trump's not tainted by scandal. I mean,
yeah,
come
he
on.
is pretty tainted.
If
yeah,
he's
there's a
not,
lot
then
going on.
what president is?
That's
Okay.
true.
The next, so we have four of the keys turned. So foreign military failure. If the incumbent administration suffers no major failure in the military. He hasn't suffered a major failure in the
Yeah,
military.
yeah,
Yeah.
Incumbent charisma. The incumbent party candidate is charismatic or a national hero. He's definitely charismatic. Not,
yeah.
not a national hero, but he's definitely charismatic. And then the final
Oh
one
man, I don't.
is
Yeah, I guess
the final
I don't
one
even
is
view him as charismatic though.
oh
Like
come
he
on,
just.
dude. He
He
plays
he
the
has
media
charisma.
like a fiddle.
Yeah, I guess. Yeah.
Okay, challenger charisma is the final one, and this is the most subjective of all the keys. So the challenging party candidate is not charismatic, meaning if the challenger
Mm.
is charismatic, that's considered a key. So we have four. If we hit this, then it still means Trump's going to win, but it means that we only need one other key to turn for him not to win. Do you think that the challenger is going to have charisma? It's hard to say. Like, does Sleepy Joe have charisma? Does Harris have charisma? Does Warren have charisma? Kinda, not really. So I think we're pretty much stuck at four keys, and we would need six keys in order for Trump to lose. So unfortunately, my most likely scenario is that Trump's going to win.
Yeah, I mean, you know, until the general election, it's a lifetime, right? Like we still have a year and change. That's so much time for something to happen, whether it's policy, whether it's, whatever. So we can't really tell. But if you buy my book, it's recently published. No,
The 14
but
keys.
yeah, the 14 keys.
No,
Take
but
that.
this has successfully predicted something like the last like 7 presidents or something.
I remember in like 2015 or 2016, this guy was promoting this, and the media was playing it like he was just some, I think he's out of American University, right, or something. Like they were playing him as though he's just some quack, and nope, he predicted it right.
Hmm.
So
Yeah, apparently it uses the same prediction models that were used to predict seismic activity. So it's a really data-driven approach where they look at these like I mean, I don't know how they use seismic data to create this model, but that's what it says on Wikipedia.
Maybe it's the same underlying model, like a neural network or some sort of algorithm that gets the
Right.
incoming data. I mean, and I don't think the likely case is Trump winning. And this is,
Really?
I live in Tennessee and I can kind of gauge the general sentiment around what's going on here. At the beginning of the term, it was all, pro-Trump, hate Hillary, the general rhetoric. What I see and what I have seen more recently is people are annoyed as hell with Trump. They're like, okay, he's doing some things, and give me somebody that I can get behind. I think if we go with a far left candidate, we're probably not going to win. But if we can have a centrist, I think they'll pull a lot of previous Trump supporters to the center and vote Democrat. Like even the most staunch Republicans are like, okay, if you give me a reasonable Democrat, I will vote for that Democrat because everyone's just kind of fed up with how
Hmm.
Trump tweets everything, his stream of consciousness. And it makes me optimistic hearing that from Tennessee, where generally that has not been the case
Right.
until sort of recently. And I think also he's causing a lot more instability in the market, which is like just the past 2 days. I don't know what the market is today, but it's almost
It's been
down
down.
2%. It's 2% down. It's 1% each day, pretty much, which is a lot of money in the
Well,
general
part of
market.
that's also the Fed lowered
No,
interest
Mhm.
rates.
but a lot of that is good for business.
Yeah.
But
Right,
the
but it's an
the
indicator that they foresee a downturn coming. So it's
right,
kind of like, oh shit, what's going to happen?
yeah, there's more nuance to it than foreseeing a downturn. I
Like
mean,
economic
there's a
global slowdown.
yeah, like I'm not sure what the situation is going to be, but I know a lot of yesterday's downfall was supposedly around the extra tariffs on China. And I
Mhm.
think people are getting fed up with this trade war, and I think that that's going to be pretty good ammunition for any Democrat, really.
Hmm.
Um,
What
so
do
I
you,
think in the likely case, if it's centrist, a centrist candidate, then they will win. If it's a Bernie character, if it's an Elizabeth Warren, then I think Trump is probably going to win.
Well,
Um,
what's interesting is that, you'd expect normally people who do have a large stake in the financial health of the country, and I mean people, wealthier people, let's say,
mhm.
you'd expect them to be
financially
pretty
gifted?
sure, yeah, gifted. Uh, they, I remember reading recently that they're actually warming up to Warren. Uh,
Interesting.
and it's probably because, yeah, I mean, she has something like a wealth tax, which, debating the constitutionality of that, whatever. Um, but she's actually willing to at least recognize that there should be some sort of policy intervention to
Hmm.
rein in excesses, and that, I mean, I will say this for her is that she is a brilliant policy mind.
Yeah.
And, you know, if you're someone that's worried about someone like Donald Trump making sweeping changes and just throwing a 10% tariff out there because he didn't sleep well or whatever, like that's not going to happen with Senator Warren. And I know that
Yeah.
there's, for people that are tracking that closely, financial people, uh, stability is the name of the game. They want someone who's
Hmm.
stable and predictable so that they can make
Mm.
rapid, computer-driven, data-driven decisions off of that. So,
Hmm.
so I'm
Yeah,
Right.
and
just saying.
I hope that's the. I mean, I would love if she could do well, and I think that wasn't I wasn't going
Saying his
against her and
favorite.
thinking I don't
Yeah.
like
Yeah,
her.
Well, what do you think
Um,
is actually the most likely, Brett?
out of the Democrats,
Like,
or
how do you foresee if you had to bet money on how the future is going to play out, who's going to win the nomination, and then who's going to win the general? What would you bet?
all right, I'm looking at a list now. I bet to win the nomination and the general. I mean, probably Biden right now. just because everything seems to kind of be going his way. It's still way too early.
Right.
An
And you think
example
he
of
would
that.
win the general if he won the primary?
Yeah, I mean, it depends on the feeling of the country and whether the economy's gone down and whether people are getting tired of, Trump flying off the cuff, and kind of shooting from the hip. And if they want someone who's more traditional and offers more stability, definitely more political stability, yeah, I think Joe Biden would probably win if he were nominated. But it's still too far to tell. I
Yeah.
mean, there's still earlier this year was the financial primary, the donor primary, where people that bundle large amounts for candidates, people that collect checks and, do all that, they determined who they're supporting. And I think that gave Biden a bit of a boost. And right now, they're kind of in the interest group primary. So groups that offer endorsements, like the unions or, environmental groups or whatever, they are still figuring out who they're going to support. So once that's settled up, then I think we're going to start having a firmer picture, a clearer picture of what who's actually likely to win.
Yeah. Well, we should do a follow-up episode when the Republicans do their national primary, and we can talk about the future of their party, but then we can also touch on, okay, what's been happening recently with the Democrats, because
That'd be
it'll be
pretty sweet.
interesting to see it play out.
Definitely. Definitely. I mean, they play off of the other, they play off of each other. So it's
Heads
like,
and tails,
you
up and
can't-
down, Republican, Democrat.
Oh man, I got to have a side gig
Yeah.
in case this doesn't work out.
You're our political correspondent. You already got a side gig.
Yeah, I guess that's true. I'll wait for my check in the mail.
Yeah.
Uh,
Yeah.
yeah.
Awesome.
So I just want to, if you're wrapping up,
Yeah,
I just
I want to
make
hear any
sure-
final thoughts or anything you have.
I want to make sure we've done our due diligence by listing literally everyone who's running
Yeah.
in the Democratic primary. So you have Michael Bennett, Colorado senator, kind of a new Democrat, Joe Biden, Bill de Blasio. We didn't mention him, but he
He's a blowhard.
he made yeah. Doesn't know how to work a subway.
I like to write people off with a single phrase.
He chose the last name de Blasio. Like his original last name, I think that's his maiden name. His original last name was like Wilhelm or something.
Huh.
And he chose the name. Anyway, Cory Booker, okay, covered him. Steve Bullock, Montana, governor of Montana. He
I
had
don't like
kind
the
of a-
way he talks. He's too much like this. And folks, when you got the regular voters out there and Donald Trump, it's like so annoying.
Yeah, he's a cowboy. Pete Buttigieg, covered him. Julian Castro, he laid down some serious fire
Yeah.
at the debate.
He won the woke awards for sure.
Yeah, definitely. He actually has a pretty strong chance. I'd watch him. He's definitely shored up, the Latino Hispanic, wing of the party. How like in the House there's something called the Congressional Hispanic Caucus, which represents the interests of Hispanic and Latino members. And I mean, he seems to be the only one from that demographic group who's running, and that's particularly important, going in the future and now. So keep an eye on
Yeah.
him. John Delaney, Tulsi Gabbard, Kirsten
Yeah.
Gillibrand, Mike Gravel, Kamala Harris, covered all them. John Hickenlooper, it doesn't, okay.
I met him.
Jay-
He's a nice guy. Yeah.
Got a great name.
Hmm.
Yeah, I like him. Just for his name. I don't actually know what he stands for. Jay Inslee, Amy Klobuchar from Minnesota, senator.
Yeah. Scott Adams made the point that she's not telegenic. She doesn't play well on television, and I know that she's gotten a lot of flack for her employees not liking her, like saying she's a mean boss, basically. And I will say that my sister's friend works for Elizabeth Warren, and absolutely loves Lizzie, as she calls her, and it is telling what your employees think of you.
Yeah, I'm not going to comment there. Seth Moulton from Massachusetts. He's just always kind of rabble-rousing. He tried to unseat Nancy Pelosi a while
Oh,
back.
I don't know him.
he's a veteran. He's had that going, but I don't think he's going to get much anywhere in this contest. Nice guy, though. I've met him a few times. Beto O'Rourke. We didn't cover him at all.
Yeah. Well, I think Scott Adams called him an empty suit. But the more favorable take on him is that he's really good in 5 or 10 minute speech increments. But when you try to make him just do 30-second or 60-second sound bites, he's not nearly as effective.
Yeah, he should run for Senate again.
Yeah.
Tim Ryan from Ohio. He's the guy that kept getting
such a cynic.
smacked down. Yeah. He's also a nice guy, too, though.
Yeah.
Bernie Sanders, Tom Steyer, Elizabeth Warren, Marianne Williamson, Andrew Yang. Yeah. We ran through them, guys. Jeez.
That's good. Andrew Yang gained the most Twitter followers after the debate. He gained 25,000 followers after a single night. So he is the candidate of choice for the cognoscenti, the Twitter folks. So
nice traditional Latin pronunciation there.
Oh, yeah. Brett and I are both classicists, so naturally.
Of course.
Yeah.
But yeah, and then, I don't know, Donald Trump and Bill Weld. You guys know Bill Weld?
No.
He's a former governor of Massachusetts. He's like he was the Libertarian VP in 2016 under Gary Johnson. And Bill Weld is like a Massachusetts Republican. He's an old Boston Brahmin, like Rockefeller Republican, doesn't really care what you do in your private life, just likes, Well,
I saw this clip of the Libertarian debate, and they were debating whether you should have to have a driver's license before you get in a car.
Yeah.
It's like these guys are so far like having their own conversation that's like so separate from the rest of mainstream America. It's just it's not something worth spending too much attention on right now.
Well, yeah, but John McAfee's pretty funny. He's crazy.
Yeah, he's a great Twitter personality.
Yeah, I always love the Libertarian debates because, like, invariably there's some guy wearing a V for Vendetta mask with like a ponytail that hasn't been washed in decades.
Yeah.
You get a lot of interesting characters there, but yeah.
Nice. Well, something to keep track of. Thank you, Brett, for joining us on today's episode, and thank you everyone for listening. This has been the Future of the Democratic Party.
We're going to talk about
and
what
we'll see you
has
guys next
happened,
time.
what is currently happening,
Thank you,
and what will inevitably happen.
The past, the present, and the future.
Our computer is picking up a strange signal.
The past, the present, and the future, baby.
What's the world coming to?
The past, the present, and the future. The past, the present, and the future, baby. The past, the present, and the future.
Will attempt to stimulate consciousness.
The past, the present, and the future, baby.
Behind the strange signal is an alien
The
intelligence.
past, the present, and the future. The past, the present, and the future, baby.
It's possible.
Hey Futurists, if you've made it this far, you might be wondering who created the Hence the Future theme song. It was created by the Walden Brothers, and you can find them on Spotify. The Walden Brothers also produced the sound bites for the worst case, the best case, and the most likely future scenarios. At Hence the Future, we're always looking for ways to improve the quality of our episodes and our predictions. To that end, we're building a team of researchers to curate the most authoritative and highly vetted sources as the foundation for every episode. If you'd like to support these efforts, you can donate a small monthly amount at anchor.fm/hencethefuture. And if you haven't done so already, please rate and review the podcast on iTunes or wherever you listen to podcasts. We appreciate your support.